My husband stood in our kitchen with one duffel bag. One smug little smile. And enough confidence to power a city. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he had chosen the good shirt. Not the old gray one he wore when he actually intended to leave the house angry. Not the wrinkled weekend polo he threw on when he wanted to frighten me with the threat of distance but still expected dinner waiting when he came back. No, Travis had put on the navy button-down that made him look sharper than he was. Younger than he was. And just sympathetic enough to strangers who didn't know where the money came from. He had dressed for witness. That told me everything. He leaned against the marble island like the house already belonged more to his exit than to my staying. One hand hooked in his pocket. Car keys on the counter. Phone face up. That maddening expression men wear when they think they're about to become unforgettable by walking away from a woman they've spent years teaching to shrink around them. "I can't do this anymore," he said. He said it slowly, carefully, like a line he had already practiced in the car. Outside. The pool lights were on. The landscaping lamps along the stone path were glowing gold against the hedges. The Sub-Zero hummed softly. Somewhere upstairs. The air handler clicked over. The whole house, my house. Though he had gotten very comfortable forgetting that was alive with systems he never noticed until they stopped working. That part matters. Because when I say I shut off everything he lived on, I do not mean love. Love had gone dark a long time before he packed that bag. I mean the actual systems. The structure. The invisible scaffolding he moved through every day without ever asking who kept it standing. The card accounts. The car lease. The access codes. The shared billing authorizations. The vendor privileges. The club extension. The household payroll. The office suite he pretended was ours because he had gotten used to keys opening doors he had never paid to install. He thought I would cry. That was clear from the way he kept pausing after every sentence, leaving little theatrical gaps where my begging was apparently supposed to go. "I need space," he said. Pause. "This marriage has become suffocating." Pause. "I think maybe being apart will help you understand what you've been taking for granted." That almost made me laugh. Me. Taking things for granted. I was standing at the far end of the kitchen in bare feet and one of my father's old cashmere wraps. Holding the mug of tea I had reheated twice and forgotten to drink. I had flour on one sleeve from the tart dough I'd abandoned when I heard the garage door open and felt, with that old wife's instinct I had grown to despise in myself, that he was bringing performance home. He wanted a scene. Not necessarily shouting. Travis was smarter than that. He wanted grief. A panic. Negotiation. The whole trembling little opera of a woman realizing the man she has financed, steadied, defended, and overestimated, is finally walking out and taking the illusion of marriage with him. He wanted tears, because tears would prove value. He wanted me shaken because being able to shake me was the only kind of power he had ever really trusted. Instead, I took a sip of lukewarm tea and said, "Okay." Just that. One word. It landed harder than anything louder would have. He blinked. Not much. But enough. "Okay?" he repeated. I set the mug down on the counter between us. "You said you can't do this anymore," I said. "Okay." That was when the confidence in his face changed shape. Not vanished. Tightened. Because suddenly the script wasn't obeying him. Men like Travis do not fear conflict. They feed on it. What unsettles them is calm. Calm suggests premeditation. Calm suggests they may not. In fact, be the only person in the room who has seen the ending coming. He straightened away from the island. "You think I'm bluffing?" "No," I said. That threw him more. Because if I had accused him of bluffing, he could have escalated. Grabbed the bag. Delivered another line. Slammed a door hard enough to bruise the walls. Forced me into the role he had assigned me. But certainty is harder to perform against than contempt. And I was very certain. I knew exactly what he thought this moment was. He thought leaving me would turn off the house. He thought the account managers would still answer his number. The black Amex would still clear. The Range Rover in the driveway would still recognize his key fob. The downtown office suite would still invoice the household holding company. The country club would still extend his guest privileges. The contractor payroll would still draft from the shared operations account he had not noticed bore only my signature authority after the trust restructure in April. He thought separation meant drama first. Logistics later. That was his mistake. He had spent 8 years married to a woman he kept calling too emotional with money, while every comfort in his life ran through structures I built, corrected, or quietly placed beyond the reach of his moods. He picked up his keys. "That's it?" he asked. "You have nothing to say?" I looked at the duffel bag, then at the watch on his wrist, a graduation gift from my mother he had started referring to, in public, as something he'd picked up a few years ago. Then, at the man himself. And finally, because I wanted him to hear exactly how little theater he was getting from me, I said, "You should leave before midnight." He frowned. "Why?" I smiled then. Not sweetly. Not cruelly. Just enough. "Because," I said, "at Doisperzeche, unu, everything you live on stops answering to you." For the first time that night, my husband looked uncertain. Good. Because he still thought he was leaving me. He hadn't yet understood that what he was really doing was walking out of a life I had already begun shutting behind him. The truth is, Travis Cole had been living off me so long he had started calling it his lifestyle. That's how men like him survive their own mediocrity. They move through structures other people built, borrow the elegance of systems they never understood, and then after enough years begin speaking as if access were achievement. By the time he stood in our kitchen with the duffel bag and the good shirt, he genuinely believed he was the one leaving something behind. That was almost funny. Almost. When I married Travis. He was still charming in the way unfinished men can be, when they haven't yet been given enough comfort to reveal their real proportions. He was handsome, quick, socially easy, and just insecure enough to make ambition look like hunger instead of entitlement. He came from the kind of family that always talked about building something without ever mentioning how much private debt sat behind the granite countertops and lake memberships. I should have recognized the type earlier. My father did. Ruth Bennett, my mother, certainly did. She never disliked Travis openly. But she had a way of going very still when he spoke too confidently about things he had not yet earned. My mother trusted numbers more than charm. And Travis was all charm. The first Christmas after our engagement, she pulled me aside while he was outside admiring the imported cypress trees by the pool and said, "Men who are overly impressed by infrastructure rarely stay grateful to the person maintaining it." I laughed then. I thought she was being hard on him. I wasn't stupid. Just in love in the ordinary female way, smart enough to see the flaws, foolish enough to believe devotion and structure could civilize them over time. It can't. It only teaches certain men what to stand under while taking credit for the roof. My father died 18 months before the wedding, which left me with more than grief and less room for fantasy than I'd realized. He also left me with something Travis never fully understood. Even after years of enjoying it, control wrapped in boring language. Holding companies, property trusts, layered LLCs, vendor accounts, operating agreements, service contracts, quiet authority arranged through paper instead of volume. My father had built storage, logistics, and regional distribution money in the least glamorous way possible, through systems that kept functioning, whether anyone applauded or not. My mother inherited the discipline. I inherited the instinct. Travis inherited none of it. But he adored the result. He loved the house before he loved me. I know that sounds cruel, but time has a way of clarifying what politeness used to blur. He loved the gated drive, the lake view, the membership access, The private dining room at the club where staff knew his drink order without him noticing that they knew it, because the household account had been paying dues since before he graduated college. He loved the office suite downtown that he described as my satellite place. Though the lease sat inside Bennett Holdings under a management umbrella he could not have diagrammed if you'd held a match to his cuff, and because I never corrected him publicly, because I believed marriage required a certain amount of graceful merging his misunderstandings fattened. That was the real danger. Not cruelty at first. Assumption. He began saying our money in rooms where I noticed he only meant it when spending. He began referring to family counsel, as if Ellis Dane worked for both of us equally. He started giving opinions on vendor renewals, property staff, and charitable disbursement timing, with the faintly annoyed confidence of a man who believes domestic infrastructure naturally becomes his the minute he stops asking, who arranged it. The first time I felt something go wrong was over the club account. A small thing. Embarrassingly small. Maybe. But that is how rot introduces itself into elegant lives. I was reviewing quarterly household statements not because I'm obsessive, but because that's what women raised inside real money do when they don't want to wake up one morning married to a myth. And I found a series of dinner charges at the club on nights Travis had told me he was closing out. Investor drinks. He wasn't with investors. He was with Marin Pike. I didn't know her name yet. Just the pattern. 2 steak dinners. A Veuve bottle. Dessert neither of us ever ordered because Travis always called it pointless sugar. Private dining room surcharge. Then flowers charged through a hospitality subledger 2 days later under a vendor code he should never have been using at all. When I asked him about the charges, he smiled. That should have been warning enough. Not denial. Not surprise. Just that mild, patient smile men wear when they think the woman in front of them is overreaching into domains they've already reclassified as too complicated for her. He kissed my forehead, said I was getting emotional around money again, and explained that keeping up certain client-facing appearances sometimes required flexibility. Flexibility. I let it go then. Not because I believed him. Because I was still deciding whether the insult was stupidity or intent. Later came the office suite car service invoices. Then the retail spending that sat just below alert thresholds. Then the health club add-on on a card extension he swore he barely used. Then the messages on his second iPad not explicit. Not enough for theater. Just enough to reveal that someone named Marin was very comfortable telling my husband she missed our afternoons and that he should stop pretending the house changes anything. That was when I stopped feeling confused. Not outraged. Clear. Marin Pike wasn't an accident. She was the natural consequence of a man who had spent too long being cushioned by systems he mistook for his own competence. Travis was not leaving our marriage because I failed him. He was leaving because comfort had taught him fantasy. He thought he could step out of one fully provisioned life and into another without ever experiencing the ugly middle where reality bills the body. And the worst part? He thought I would help smooth that middle over. That I would beg him. Bargain with him. Cry hard enough to make myself useful one last time. He had no idea that by the time he packed that duffel bag, I had already begun separating accounts, reviewing authorizations, changing access sequences, and reading every agreement he had never bothered to understand. He thought I was the emotional one. What he never noticed was that I had always been the operating system. The real insult was not that Travis planned to leave. It was that he expected to leave theatrically. That's the part people miss when they talk about betrayal, as if the worst thing is always the affair. The lies. The slow corrosion. Sometimes the ugliest part is the confidence. The absolute, polished confidence with which a person decides they get to wound you and then watch you perform pain for them like proof of value. Travis didn't come home to separate quietly. He came home to stage my collapse. You could see it in the details once you knew how to look. The duffel bag was packed just enough to look serious, but not enough to survive a week. The expensive shirt, the fresh shave, the little speech breaks where he clearly expected tears or bargaining to rush in and fill the silence. Even the timing was insulting. He had waited until after dinner, after I'd cleaned the counters, After the tart dough was resting, after the household had gone soft and dim and domestic precisely, the hour when a woman is most likely to feel like home is something she must save. And then, because cruelty like that is never complete without an audience, even if the audience is only implied, his phone lit up on the counter, with Marin Pike's name glowing across the screen. That was when the night crossed from sad to filthy. Not because I hadn't known. I had, but because of what he did next. He didn't silence the phone. He looked at it. Then at me. Then he smiled. Actually smiled. Just a small one. Almost apologetic. But practiced enough that I knew instantly what it meant. He wanted me to see it. Wanted the triangulation. Wanted the humiliation of being left not for mystery. Not for some tragic, incompatible future. But for a woman I already knew existed and was apparently expected to fear. The screen dimmed. Then lit again. Marin, is she crying yet? There are moments when the blood in your body seems to cool into something more useful than anger. That was one of them. I looked at the message. Then, at Travis. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he picked up the phone, turned it face down with lazy confidence, and said, "This is exactly why I couldn't tell you sooner." That line was so grotesque I almost admired it. Not for its cleverness. For its audacity. He had brought another woman into the center of our kitchen. Into the middle of his little farewell theater. And then framed my mere awareness of it as the reason he'd been forced into dishonesty. That was the thing about Travis. He never simply did wrong. He curated his wrong so that the nearest woman had to carry interpretation. Cleanup. An emotional consequence for him. I set my mug down very carefully. "You brought her into my house by text message," I said. He actually looked offended by my tone. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be." That sentence still amazes me. Because by then, the ugliness had already unpacked itself. It was leaning against my marble island in a navy shirt. Pretending departure was an act of courage. While the woman waiting for him across town texted like she was following live entertainment. And then he delivered the line that made everything easy. Easy is the wrong word. Maybe. Clean. "Then," he said, "let's not pretend you don't know how dependent you've become." I remember every single second after that with unnatural clarity. The pool lights outside. The reflection of the pendant lamps in the dark windows. The tiny crease near his left cuff where he hadn't ironed well enough. My own bare feet on the heated stone. The smell of butter from the tart dough. The exact shape of the silence after he said the word dependent. Dependent. Me, the woman who inherited and structured the entities that owned the house he was standing in? The woman whose signature activated the household payroll? Retained the driver. Funded the office suite. Authorized the household cards. And quietly reworked every access line the minute she realized he was testing the perimeter of my patience against the elasticity of my resources. Dependent. That was the insult that crossed the threshold. Not Marin. Not even the smug little performance of leaving. That word. Because now I knew the full scale of his fantasy. Travis did not think he was walking out on a wife. He thought he was walking out on a woman whose life functioned because he stayed in it. He thought his departure would trigger fear. Then bargaining. Then concession. He thought money was atmosphere, and that he himself was structure. He had no idea what midnight was going to do to him. I walked to the drawer beside the espresso machine and took out my phone. Not to call him back. Not to scream into someone else's ear. Just to open the note Ellis Dane had sent me at 4:12 that afternoon. All revocations queued. Waiting on your release authorization. Vehicle lease reassignment pending. Household card freezes set for 12:1 a.m. Club privileges revert immediately. Suite access closes with account suspension. Temporary guest credentials expire overnight. I had not planned the confrontation, but I had planned for this. That was what he never understood. Women like me don't scream first. We read. We review. We wait until every switch is mapped before turning the lights off. Travis saw me looking at the phone and mistook it for weakness. Of course he did. He picked up the duffel bag. I'll give you a day or two, he said. Once you calm down, we can talk about what support looks like while we figure this out. Support. From him, that almost made me laugh in his face. Instead, I unlocked the screen, pressed my thumb to the queued authorization, and watched the confirmation line glow ready. Then I looked at my husband, really looked at him. At the confidence, the posture, the bag, the shirt, the cruelty dressed up as liberation, and realized the rest of the scene no longer mattered. He thought I was the one about to lose a life. He was wrong. He was about to lose access to one. I didn't press the authorization while he was still standing there. That was the first thing that unsettled him. If I had hit the button immediately, he would have understood the threat. He would have pivoted into panic, apology, bargaining. Maybe even that ugly male anger that arrives when comfort realizes it is about to become accountability. He would have called Ellis, called my mother, called Marin, called whoever men like him call when the fantasy of consequence-free betrayal starts collapsing in real time. I wanted none of that. So instead, I locked the phone and set it down beside my mug. That was worse. Because now he knew there was something I was not showing him yet. Something orderly. Something prepared. Something I trusted enough not to wave around for dramatic effect. People like Travis can survive rage. What terrifies them is administration. He gave a short laugh. You're trying to scare me. No. That line almost made me smile. Scare him? He still thought this was emotional. Still thought the only weapon available to me was performance. As if women become powerful only once they get loud enough. As if the systems around him had not already been changing shape under his feet while he was busy rehearsing abandonment. I leaned against the counter and looked at him the way I imagined my father used to look at men who confused borrowed access with talent. No, I said. I'm trying to be generous. That got him. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. Because generosity implies the ability to do otherwise. And for the first time that night, Travis had to consider the possibility that my calm was not numbness. It was discretion. He shifted the duffel higher on his shoulder. I'm not going to stand here while you act like some kind of martyr, he said. You had plenty of chances to fix this. Fix this. Interesting phrase from a man leaving with another woman waiting on the other end of his phone. I looked at the black screen face down on the counter where Marin's message had just lit up our kitchen like cheap perfume. Then back at him. What exactly was I supposed to fix? I asked. Your spending? Your lying? The fact that you've been treating my life like a waiting room until someone younger answered faster? That landed harder than I expected. His jaw moved once. Not shame. Travis was not a man built for shame. But irritation. Exposure. The mild fury of someone discovering the person they were certain they had outmaneuvered has, in fact, been taking notes? He set the duffel back on the floor and crossed his arms. That was his posture when he thought he still had leverage. You want honesty? He said. Fine. I got tired. Tired of being managed. Tired of every decision in this house being filtered through your family. Your lawyers? Your structures. Your rules. Tired of feeling like a guest in a life you never really made room for me to lead. There it was. The confession, hidden inside the complaint. Not I felt unloved. Not we drifted apart. Not even I made terrible choices. No. What hurt him was that the structure of my life had never fully bent around his sense of importance. He had mistaken not being in charge for not being valued. Men like Travis always do. If the roof doesn't register their opinion, they eventually decide the house is cruel. I let him talk. That was part of the silence, too. Let them explain themselves long enough and they usually reveal the real crime without needing to be accused of it. He gestured around the kitchen. You think because all this came from your side, I'm supposed to be grateful forever? This came from your side. There it was again. Not our home. Not our life. The truth peeking through contempt. I nodded slowly. No, I said. Just accurate. That made him angry. Good. He took one step toward me. You always do this talk in circles. Make yourself sound calm and superior. Like everyone else is too stupid to understand the real issue. I didn't move. Because the real issue was standing right there. Red-faced and overestimating himself in a kitchen he'd never paid to heat. And what is the real issue? I asked. He laughed once. Sharp and humorless. You. No. Not me. Dependency hates mirrors. I picked up my mug again, though the tea had gone fully cold by then, and watched his expression for the thing I already knew was coming. The need to provoke visible pain before walking out. He wanted proof he mattered, so he chose cruelty. Marin, he said, at least knows how to make space for a man. That sentence should have gutted me. 6 months earlier. Maybe it would have. But when you've already reviewed the account transfers, traced the club charges, changed the digital authorizations, restructured the operating accounts, and quietly moved the liabilities away from the body about to walk out on you, insults start sounding less like weapons and more like confirmation. I set the mug down again. Then I said the sentence that changed the air in the room. You should go now. He blinked. Not because he expected begging now. Because he expected a fight. Something to justify the righteousness he'd been wearing like cologne since he walked in. But if I was dismissing him calmly, cleanly. Before midnight then the script he had packed that duffel bag for was dead. You don't get to dismiss me from my own house, he said. There it was. My own house. I looked at him for a long second. Then at the key fob on the counter. Then at the phone beside my mug. Then back at him. And I realized something almost comforting. He still didn't understand the first thing about where he was standing. So I smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just enough. Travis, I said. You were never dismissed from your own house. I let that settle. Then I added, you're being timed out of mine. He stared at me. And for the first time that night, I saw it. Not anger. Not charm. Not performance. A flicker of something much more useful. Uncertainty. The first layer of truth was not emotional. It was administrative. That's what people who've never lived inside real money misunderstand. They think power announces itself through diamonds, titles, inherited names, or some dramatic reading of a will in a paneled room. It can, sometimes, but the durable kind, the kind men like Travis mistake for background noise until it vanishes, lives in structures, authorizations, signatory rights, quiet instructions, buried in boring documents. No charismatic person ever bothers to read until a key stops working. I had been building those structures back away from him for weeks. Not because I planned revenge. Because I finally stopped mistaking preparedness for cruelty. The first thing I changed was the household operating account. Travis believed the black card in his wallet was ours because it drafted from a marital umbrella he never fully understood. In reality, after the April trust restructure, Ellis Dane had moved the high-limit household operations line under a management entity with one controlling signature, mine. Travis still had spending access. Yes, because I had allowed it. But spending access is not authority. It's a leash in a tailored suit. The second thing I changed was the office suite downtown. He loved that office more than he loved any room in our marriage. 58th floor. Lake-facing conference room. Private bar cart. Leased furniture he referred to as my setup. As if aesthetic certainty counted as ownership. He used it for investor drinks. Private lunches. Quiet work days. And more often than he realized, I knew for afternoons with Marin Pike when discretion required nicer lighting than the club offered. That suite sat under Bennett Commercial Holdings. Not his company. Mine. Actually. Not even mine in the shallow, personal way people usually mean it. It belonged to a layered structure my father designed. My mother strengthened, and I updated every year without fanfare. The lease writer named Travis only as an approved executive occupant subject to revocable operating status. He had skimmed it once, years ago, and then gone back to admiring the whiskey cabinet. The third thing I changed was the vehicle chain. The Range Rover in the driveway was not gifted. No matter how often Travis liked to tell people he'd finally gotten around to upgrading last year, it ran through a holding entity tied to the same household umbrella as the staff payroll and home maintenance contracts. The insurance writer, access app, roadside account, fuel card, and service scheduling were all connected to credentials he assumed were automatic because they had always worked. Automatic. That word should be engraved on the forehead of every man who has ever mistaken a functioning life for proof of his own necessity. Then there were the smaller things. The club extension. The vendor pre-authorizations. The concierge privileges at the downtown residence he used for late city nights. The digital gate credentials. The personal trainer package tucked discreetly under wellness expense codes. The house account at the tailor who kept his collars sharp. The private car service login. Even the cell plan wasn't quite what he thought it was. None of these things, individually, made a man. That was the point. Together. However, they made his life frictionless enough for him to believe he was self-created. That was the illusion I had finally stopped subsidizing. Back in the kitchen, Travis still thought this was about dominance and emotional terrain. Still thought midnight was some symbolic line I had invented to sound ominous while secretly hoping he would stay. He had no idea Ellis Dane had already drafted the release tree. At Doisperzeche, Unoa, M. If I pressed one confirmation, the following would happen without further drama. His access card to the office suite would deactivate. The vehicle lease would be moved to retrieval status with personal use suspended. The household cards would freeze under fraud prevention protocol pending domestic restructuring. The club would revert him to guest-only standing. The driver would stop taking his instructions. The staff would report only to me. The suite concierge would no longer take his calls. The home gate would still let him out. Of course, I'm not a monster. But re-entry credentials would require separate authorization. Even his phone would experience a quieter humiliation. Premium service routing would vanish. Not disconnected again. I'm not theatrical, but stripped back to the basic plan he had once mocked my cousin for using. He thought he was leaving a woman. What he was actually leaving was an operating environment. That was the deeper truth. And I could feel him beginning to sense some outer edge of it without yet understanding the scale. You can always tell when a man who has never studied structure starts realizing structure may not love him back. The face changes. Not fear exactly. Irritation first. Then suspicion. Then that tiny, ugly flicker of grievance men feel when systems stop flattering their self-image. What did you mean? He asked. By midnight? I could have told him everything then. Could have opened the phone, shown him Ellis's message, walked him through. Line by line. The authorizations he never bothered to learn because wives and lawyers and old family systems were, in his mind, there to absorb complexity until he needed to sound decisive in front of someone else. I didn't. Because explanation is a gift. And that night, he had already taken enough. So I gave him something else instead. The first honest summary of our marriage. It means, I said, you've spent years living inside a life you never once asked how to maintain. That landed. Not because he fully understood it. Because some part of him did. And when that part stirred, I saw it the beginning of the real fear. Not that I might be angry. That I might be accurate. The first sign of panic came at 11:43 p.m. Not from me. From his phone. Marin called again. This time Travis didn't leave it face down on the counter like a little trophy. He snatched it up too fast. Glanced at the screen. And then looked at me with the expression men get when they realize another witness is about to enter the scene they've been controlling badly. Don't. I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. He hesitated anyway. That hesitation mattered. Because, until then, he had still been pretending this was clean. A man leaving. A marriage ending. Hard but necessary. The kind of thing people later describe over drinks with phrases like, "We just grew apart and sometimes love changes shape." But Marin's name lighting up the kitchen for the second time made the whole thing uglier. More immediate. Less curated. Affairs look glamorous only at a distance. Up close, they mostly look like bad timing and cheap confidence. He declined the call. Interesting. Not because he cared about me. Because he suddenly understood that every move now might matter later. Ellis had taught me that too. Once a person begins to sense they are stepping into documented consequence, their behavior changes. They start managing records without yet admitting to themselves that they're doing it. They turn phones over. They choose words more carefully. They stop making threats and start making claims. It's one of the earliest signs that bravado is rotting into fear. Travis set the phone down more carefully this time. Then he tried to laugh. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "What? You think you can just turn off my life because you're upset?" There it was. My life. Not ours. Not the one he'd said felt suffocating. Not the one he claimed he was brave enough to leave. His life. The life he had spent 8 years inhabiting under my signatures. My family structures. My household systems. My trust council. My operating accounts. And my increasingly exhausted patience. I looked at the clock over the stove. I think. I said, "You should get in the car while it still starts without a conversation." That landed. He straightened. A little color left his face. Then came the anger. Good. Anger is the last stage before panic gets honest. "You don't get to threaten me in my own marriage," he snapped. I almost smiled at the phrasing. In my own marriage. As if marriage were the one asset he still assumed titled him automatically, he took a step toward me. Not enough to frighten. Just enough to reclaim ground. That was Travis's style. He wasn't a yeller, unless he thought yelling would look manly. He preferred physical nearness. Lowered voice. The little masculine theater of making a room smaller until a woman feels unreasonable simply by continuing to stand in it. It had worked on me before. Not tonight. He pointed at my phone on the counter. "Who's feeding you this? Ellis? Your mother? Are you really hiding behind lawyers right now because you can't handle the fact that I'm done?" There it was again. That word. Hiding. Men love calling structure cowardice when it stops serving them. I folded my arms and let him talk. That was the escalation he never saw coming, not me fighting back. But me refusing to interrupt the collapse. Let them fill enough silence. And eventually, they will confess the architecture of their own entitlement. "You've always done this," he said. "Every time I try to make an actual decision, you bury it under paperwork. Under your family. Under all this inherited control crap. You don't even know how impossible you are to live with." Impossible. Interesting choice from a man who had mistaken access for affection so completely that he thought departure itself made him the injured party. My phone buzzed. Not a call. A scheduled notification. Enaist. Betinstiridesitbe. M. Revocation tree ready. Pending release authorization. Travis saw the screen light. "What is that?" I picked up the phone and looked at it. Then looked at him. "Your warning." That was when he laughed again. But this time, it sounded thin. "You can't be serious." I unlocked the phone slowly enough for him to see I wasn't bluffing. No legalese. No giant threatening display. Just a clean interface Ellis had built for me because real power never needs to shout. Bennett Domestic Operations. Pending changes. Household cards. Suspend. Vehicle access. Transfer to retrieval status. Suite credentials. Club privileges. Revert to guest only. Payroll instruction. Route exclusively to principal. Gate access. Outbound only until reassigned. Service vendors. His eyes moved over the screen. Once. Twice. Then he went very still. That was the moment panic finally got honest. Not because he understood every line. He didn't. Travis was never a details man unless details came wearing admiration. But he understood enough. Enough to see the words revoke, suspend, transfer, principal. Enough to realize that the scaffolding around his life had names, owners, and sequences he had never fully bothered to learn. That's insane, he said quietly. No more swagger now. No more speech pauses waiting for me to cry. Just a man looking at the back end of a life he thought ran on atmosphere. It's late, I said. Not insane. He reached for the phone. That was a mistake. Not because he could have hurt me. He wouldn't have dared. Because reaching for it meant admitting it was real. I moved it out of reach before his fingers got close. His jaw tightened. You can't freeze accounts I use. I already did, I said. Midnight just makes it active. He stared at me. Then, at the door to the garage. Then, at the keys on the counter. Then back at me. You could see the calculations starting to break apart in him now. Marin. The car. The suite. The cards. The simple assumption that leaving tonight would feel like liberation and not logistics. For the first time since he walked in, Travis was no longer thinking about how this scene looked. He was thinking about where he was sleeping. That was the escalation. Not louder voices. Smaller options. His phone rang again. Marin. This time he didn't pick it up. He just stood there in the good shirt with the duffel bag at his feet, staring at the infrastructure of his own life as if it had betrayed him. And I realized something almost peaceful. He still thought I was trying to punish him. He hadn't yet understood the truth. I wasn't punishing him. I was simply removing myself from the list of systems willing to carry him. The reveal happened at 12:01 a.m. in my kitchen, under the pendant lights Travis picked out and I paid for. That felt appropriate. He had wanted drama, tears, pleading, some soft, humiliating confirmation that he still held the center of the room even while walking out of it. Instead, what he got was a countdown. The clock over the stove clicked from 12 to 12:01. I pressed my thumb to the release authorization. No sound. No fireworks. No theatrical flourish. Just a clean confirmation across the screen. Revocation tree active. That was all. But people who live on invisible systems don't need spectacle to feel them vanish. They know. Their body knows before their pride catches up. Travis's phone buzzed first. Then buzzed again. Then again. Not Marin this time. Notifications. Service alerts. The quiet language of infrastructure withdrawing recognition. He stared at the screen. I watched his face as the first message came through. Card declined. Contact account administrator. Then another. Vehicle access status changed. Please contact fleet services. Then another. Suite credential invalid. See lease administrator. There it was. The public reveal he had never expected, not in a ballroom. Not in a boardroom. But in the center of a kitchen where he had assumed he was the one delivering consequence. He looked up at me. Not angry at first. Just disbelieving. Like a man who has suddenly discovered gravity is not a theory. What did you do? That question almost made me laugh. Not because he didn't know. Because he still phrased it as if I had acted on him, rather than simply stopped acting for him. I told you, I said. Everything you live on stopped answering to you. His hand tightened around the phone. You froze my cards? Yes. The Range Rover? Yes. My office? Not yours. That one hit hard. You could see it in the way his shoulders shifted. Tiny movement. Deep injury. Men like Travis can tolerate losing access longer than they can tolerate correct naming. The office suite mattered to him because he had built a fantasy around it. The cards mattered because they let him perform autonomy. But being told, Plainly. That the suite was never his in the first place. That was the kind of truth that doesn't just remove comfort, it removes self-mythology. He took a step toward me, this time not for intimidation, for appeal. That was the part I think I enjoyed most. Not cruelty, not revenge. The correction of proportion. You can't do this over one fight, he said. One fight. There it was. The old reducing instinct. Years of lying. Spending. Siphoning comfort. Disrespecting the structures around him. And preparing to walk into another woman's waiting arms and still. When consequence arrived, he wanted to call it one fight. No. I said. I did this over years. That shut him up. For one full second. He had nothing. Then he made the mistake I think he truly believed would still work on me. He softened. There's a particular voice weak men use when rage fails and entitlement gets frightened. Lower. Hurt. Suddenly full of complexity. As if the world has become confusing instead of precise. Audra, he said. Be reasonable. I looked at him and felt something almost cold enough to count as peace. Reasonable. I had been reasonable when I saw the charges at the club and asked for explanations instead of a scene. Reasonable when I found the sweet invoices and pretended not to notice the pattern right away. Reasonable when I watched him detach from the house emotionally while still moving through it materially like a prince in residence. Reasonable when I reviewed agreements instead of screaming. Reasonable when I gave him warning before midnight. Reasonable had already been the shape of my restraint. What he meant now was, be useful to me again. No. I picked up my mug and finally poured the cold tea into the sink. That domestic little sound, the thin stream. The ceramic clink somehow made the moment sharper. Because here he was. Watching the life he rode on begin to lock him out. While I was simply finishing a small task in my own kitchen. The phone in his hand rang. Marin. He answered this time. Of course he did. Marin. Hold on. He snapped. Then pulled the phone away from his ear and looked at me. This is insane. She thinks she can just... Her voice came through loud enough for me to hear. Wait. What do you mean the gate didn't open? Beautiful. Travis closed his eyes. Not in shame? In logistical pain. Because Marin, apparently, was already at the downtown residence or trying to be. The same residence whose access credentials had just reverted to base holding control. The same place he'd probably been planning to retreat to tonight with his duffel bag. His good shirt. And the soft fantasy of beginning again inside furniture I was still paying for. I leaned against the counter and said, You should tell her valet won't be covered either. He glared at me. Now the anger came back. But it wasn't the earlier kind. Not righteous. Not staged. Desperate. Cornered. You are unbelievable. No. I said. I was underestimated. And there it was. The real reveal. Not that I had money. He knew that. Not that I had lawyers. He knew that too. The thing he had never understood was that I was not merely the emotional center of his life. The wife in the house. The daughter in the family. The woman who made things softer and easier and more presentable. I was the operating authority. The signature. The principal. The person who could shut down every extension of comfort he had mistaken for personal achievement with one midnight authorization and a steady hand. Marin was still talking through the phone. Her voice sharper now. Asking questions. Getting no useful answers. Travis looked from the screen to me and finally saw the scale correctly. He had not left a woman tonight. He had walked out of a system. And that system had just closed behind him. Travis's collapse did not arrive with a shout. That would have flattered him too much. Men like him always imagine their ruin should sound important broken glass. Raised voices. Some dramatic declaration that lets them keep a little grandeur even while falling. But real collapse, especially for a man who has mistaken comfort for identity, is quieter than that. It sounds like failed access. Marin was still talking through the phone when he pulled it away from his ear and stared at the screen. "What do you mean the concierge won't let you up?" he snapped. Pause. Then, use the service entrance. Pause. Then, lower. What do you mean the credential's inactive? I watched it all happen in his face. First irritation. Then, disbelief. Then that ugly, stunned vacancy that appears when a man realizes the systems he called his life were never loyal to him personally. They were simply obeying the real owner until instructed otherwise. He tried to move away from me while he spoke. As if distance could restore authority. He crossed to the back door, looked out at the pool lights, then paced toward the pantry with the phone pressed too hard against his ear. "No. Listen to me," he said. "Tell them Travis Cole is coming up." That line almost made me laugh. As if his name were infrastructure. As if enough confidence, said in the right tone, could reopen a building. I leaned against the counter and let him keep talking. He was doing better work for me than I could have done by interrupting. Panic exposes hierarchy faster than accusation ever will. Then his wallet buzzed. A text from the card issuer. He opened it. I didn't need to see the message. I knew what it said from the alert tree Ellis had shown me earlier that afternoon. High-tier account status suspended pending principal review. Charges temporarily restricted. Contact administrator. Travis went still. Then he tried the oldest trick in the book. He laughed. "Wow," he said, turning toward me with the phone in one hand and the wallet in the other. "You really want to go nuclear over hurt feelings?" No. That was not what this was. And he knew it. But men like Travis always try to reframe systems as emotion the moment systems stop favoring them. If he could make this look hysterical, then maybe he could preserve the illusion that his suffering was noble and mine merely unstable. I shook my head once. "This isn't nuclear," I said. "It's accounting." That line hit him harder than anger would have. Because accounting has no vanity in it. No romance. No room for his preferred mythology. It is simply consequence arranged in rows. His phone buzzed again. This time from the Fleet Service app. Primary user privileges removed. Vehicle in retrieval review. He stared at it. Then, at the key fob on the counter. Then back at me. "You touched the car?" There it was again, that childish little note of outrage. As if the car were somehow sacred in a way my life had never been. "I corrected the registration chain," I said. "You corrected," he gave a short stem. Disbelieving laugh. "Odra, you can't just decide I don't have transportation." "I didn't decide it tonight," I said. "I decided it when I realized you thought leaving me meant taking the structure with you." That shut him up for a second. Then the anger came back. But sloppier now. Less tailored. He snatched up the key fob and stalked toward the garage door. Good. That was the collapse accelerating. The need to test reality physically, because abstract consequence still felt too humiliating to accept in place. He hit the interior garage release and disappeared through the mudroom. I stayed where I was. A few seconds later, I heard it. The Range Rover unlocking with reduced access mode, one short chirp instead of the usual double confirmation. Then silence. Then a muffled curse. Then the engine trying to turn over, and failing authorization on the immobilizer reset. He came back into the kitchen with a face I had never seen on him before. Not furious. Not charming. Not wounded. Not manipulative. Small. That was the true collapse. Not losing the car. Learning the car had never loved him back. "You disabled it." I flagged personal use pending retrieval. "It's the same damn thing." "No," I said. "One is emotional. One is legal." He looked at me like he wanted to hate me enough for it to feel masculine. But what he was feeling was dependence. Finally visible to himself. And there is nothing masculine about that kind of revelation to men like Travis. His phone rang again. "Marin." He answered on speaker by accident. Or maybe by panic. "All right," she said immediately. No greeting. No softness. The concierge says the suite is inactive. The club card didn't go through. And valet wants cash. What is going on? Beautiful. Travis lunged to take it off speaker. But too late. The kitchen had already heard every word. Not just me. The house. The marble island. The pendant lights. The sub-zero. The polished floors. The whole carefully maintained environment he'd moved through as if it were some natural extension of his own importance, had just listened to his future collapse in a woman's irritated voice from downtown. Marin. Shut up for a second. He hissed. That was when I truly knew he was done. Not because of the affair. Not because Marin sounded inconvenient instead of seductive. Because he had reached the point where he could no longer maintain separate performances. Husband leaving nobly. Lover beginning something exciting. Independent man, stepping into the next phase of his life. All of those scripts had just crashed into each other in my kitchen under my lights. Marin, unfortunately for him, kept talking. You told me the suite was handled. She snapped. And why is your card declining? I had to pay for my own drinks. There it was. The final indignity. Not heartbreak. Invoices. He cut the call. Too late. He stood there in the good shirt with the duffel bag on the floor and the dead key fob in his hand. Looking less like a man leaving a marriage and more like a teenager, locked out of a life he'd stolen too confidently. Then he said the one thing truly broken men always say when the systems around them stop flattering their delusions. You can't do this to me. I looked at him for a long moment. Then at the bag. The shirt. The phone. The keys. The absurd little wreckage of his evening arranged across my kitchen like evidence in a case no one needed to argue anymore. And I said, very quietly, I'm not doing anything to you. Travis. I let that settle. Then I gave him the cleanest truth of the night. I'm just no longer doing it for you. That was the moment he finally understood. Not the account freezes. Not the car. Not even Marin stranded downtown. The real collapse was simpler. The woman he had built his easy life on was gone while still standing right in front of him. The first thing I took back was the house. Not legally. That had never really been in question. Emotionally. There is a difference. And women learn it too late if they are unlucky. A house can be yours on paper for years while feeling occupied by someone else's moods. Someone else's appetites. Someone else's careless sense of entitlement. You can pay every invoice. Hold every deed. Approve every renovation. Retain every staff member. And still spend half your life adjusting your breathing around a man who acts like the roof is only stable because he has chosen not to leave it. That ended at 12:14 a.m. Travis was still standing in my kitchen. Phone. In hand. Duffel at his feet. The good shirt beginning to collapse around his shoulders in all the wrong places. The charm was gone. The righteous husband act was gone. Even the anger had started to drain out of him. Because anger requires footing. And his had just been repossessed in real time. He looked at me like I had become someone else. That almost made me smile. No. I thought. I had become visible. You need to call Ellis. He said finally. There it was. Not please. Not let's fix this. Not I made a mistake. Just the first instinct of every dependent man, when the structure goes dark, find the person who can turn the systems back on. I shook my head. No. You need to leave. His jaw tightened. I can't even get into the suite. I know. The car won't start. I know. My cards. I know. That was the second thing I took back. Information advantage. For too long. Travis had lived inside a marriage where I always knew more than I said and used that knowledge only to preserve peace. I knew what things cost. Knew what he was spending. Knew what accounts had drifted. Knew when his stories didn't line up. Knew when Marin entered the picture. Knew when he stopped treating the house as home and started treating it as serviced luxury with emotional labor included. And every time. I used what I knew to stabilize. Tonight, I used it to conclude. He dragged a hand down his face. Where am I supposed to go? That question did something strange inside me. Not pity, not satisfaction, clarity, because for the first time in years, he was speaking from the position he had always silently assigned to me. Dependent, disoriented, waiting for someone else to solve continuity. I could have answered cruelly. Go to Marin. Go to a hotel. Go wherever men go when they spend years rehearsing departure and suddenly discover departure has expenses. Instead, I gave him the clean truth. That, I said, is the first adult question you've asked all night. He looked at me as if I'd slapped him. Good. Sometimes dignity is not softness. Sometimes it is finally using the correct scale. His phone buzzed again. This time he didn't even check it. He knew it would be another failure. Another denied access. Another tiny mechanical refusal from a life that had finally stopped pretending he was essential to its operation. He sank onto one of the counter stools. That was the first time I'd seen him look small in this house. Not seated. Small. It changed the whole room. The marble island looked larger. The pendant lights steadier. The silence less crowded. My father's rap on my shoulders suddenly felt like what it was, not comfort borrowed from the dead, but inheritance. Structure. Continuity. Something that outlasted the men who mistook proximity to it for ownership. And that was the third thing I took back. My own scale. Travis had spent years reducing me in ways subtle enough to sound civilized. Too emotional with money. Too attached to control. Too influenced by my family. Too cautious. Too structured. Too difficult to just flow with. He made my competence sound like coldness, and my stewardship sound like inhibition, because that was the only way to justify how much of his life rested on it. Now, watching him fold under the absence of what I had quietly maintained, I saw myself accurately again. I was not controlling. I was carrying. Not rigid. Reliable. Not difficult. Foundational. That matters. More than revenge. More than the account freezes. The immobilized vehicle. The dead sweet credentials. The suddenly expensive mistress waiting outside the wrong building. Because once you understand your role correctly, you stop negotiating with people who only ever benefited from your mislabeling. I walked to the butler's pantry. Opened the small drawer where the household access fobs were kept. And removed his secondary gate tag and the brass key to the downstairs wine room he liked to show off to guests as if he'd chosen the French oak himself. Then I returned to the island and set them beside the dead key fob. He looked down at them. Seriously? He asked. Yes. He laughed once. Hollow. You're inventorying me. No. I said. I'm separating assets. That landed. Of course it did. Because words like that were my language. Not his. And hearing himself described in terms of actual consequence stripped the last of his romance away. He was no longer a husband leaving on principle. No longer a wronged man stepping into freedom. No longer the center of anyone's dramatic evening. He was an access problem being resolved. I turned then, opened the kitchen desk drawer, and pulled out the envelope Ellis had dropped off that afternoon with the preliminary separation directives, temporary property instructions, and personal inventory acknowledgement form. I placed it in front of him. Take this, I said. Read it somewhere else. His eyes moved over the papers. But he didn't touch them. I can't believe you planned all this. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said the sentence I think he will hear for the rest of his life whenever anything he took for granted stops working. No. I finally stopped planning around you. That was it. That was the moment I got my name back from the version of myself who had spent too many years making room for his instability inside systems built for continuity. I was not the wife being abandoned. I was the principal withdrawing service. And once I understood that fully, there was nothing left in that kitchen for me to beg for. 3 months later, the house was quiet in the way real peace is quiet. Not empty. Not lonely. Ordered. That was the new order. The first week after Travis left, people kept expecting spectacle. My mother most of all expected fallout. Though she was too disciplined to call it that, Ruth Bennett arrived the morning after with 2 garment bags. 1 banker's box. And the expression of a woman who had survived enough men to know that the legal aftermath is never the same as the emotional one. She stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Travis had tried to leave like a prince and ended up stranded like an unpaid guest, and asked only one question. Did you sleep? I had. Actually. Not deeply. Not beautifully. But enough. That seemed to satisfy her. Ellis Dane handled the rest the way men like him always do when they are very good and completely unromantic. By noon, Travis's personal property was being inventoried. By Tuesday, the suite downtown had a new lessee. By Thursday, the Range Rover was gone from the drive and the service account closed. The club had sent a discreet note acknowledging his status reversion. Pending final instruction. Household payroll ran cleaner than it had in years once no one was slipping extra car requests. Side reimbursements. And vanity expenses through it, under the fiction of marital convenience. Marin Pike lasted 11 days. I know that because Travis called me on day 12. Different number. Worse tone. No charm left. No speeches. Just a man standing in the middle of a life he could no longer finance with proximity asking, "Did you really have to make it this hard?" That line almost made me laugh. Not because it was absurd. Because it was so perfectly him, even after the cards failed. The suite locked. The club cooled. The car vanished. And Marin discovered that men are less compelling when you have to cover their valet. He still thought the hardship had been something I applied to him, rather than the natural shape of a world no longer subsidized by my silence. I kept my answer simple. "No," I said. "I just stopped making it easy." He hung up on me. Good. The divorce moved faster once he realized our life had never been jointly operated in the way he needed it to be for leverage. The house was protected. The principal assets were ring-fenced. The secondary spending accounts had audit trails that made his little habits look exactly as embarrassing as they were. Ellis never had to raise his voice. Travis's fantasy simply ran out of legal surface to stand on. And me? The strangest part was how little grief there was once the noise stopped. That sounds colder than I mean it. I grieved plenty during the marriage. Quietly. Incrementally. In the thousand small humiliations of being called controlling when I was actually carrying things he never noticed until they worked. In every dinner where he told stories as if our life had arranged itself around his taste. In every bill. Every access code. Every domestic continuity I managed while he practiced dissatisfaction like it was sophistication. By the time he left, most of the mourning had already been done inside the structure. What I felt afterward was not heartbreak. It was clearance. I took back the downstairs study first. Travis used to call it his office, though he had never once paid for the paneling, the built-ins, the Persian runner, or the signed architectural prints on the far wall. For 2 years, I barely went in there because the room had begun to smell like his version of ambition expensive cologne. A stale coffee. And things deferred onto other people. I had the desk removed. Repainted the walls a softer bone white. Moved in my father's old drafting table and the walnut cabinet that used to sit in his logistics office downtown. Now it's mine. Not symbolically. Functionally. That matters. I review trusts there. Meet Ellis there. Read operating reports there. Drink my tea there while the lake light changes. It is no longer a room where a man performs importance against structures he didn't build. It is a room where work actually happens. That was the truest restoration of all. Not revenge. Not watching him shrink. Not even the midnight reveal. Use. Correct use. The systems he lived on didn't merely shut off for him. They returned to their proper purpose. Sometimes people ask, gently and stupidly. Whether I regret being so hard? No. I regret being misread for so long. There is a difference between hardness and boundary, between punishment and discontinuation, between cruelty and refusing further service to someone who has mistaken your competence for endless emotional labor. Travis thought I'd beg because begging would have preserved his story, that he was central, desired, necessary, the living engine of a life that would collapse without him. Instead, the truth emerged in the least flattering way possible. He was an extension user, a secondary authorization, a man mistaken for structure because he stood under it confidently enough. He did not destroy me by leaving. He revealed himself by discovering how much stopped working when he did. Last Sunday, my mother and I had dinner on the back terrace. Just us. Grilled trout, roasted fennel, one very good bottle of white burgundy, and the kind of easy silence women only earn after they have finally stopped protecting the wrong man from his own proportions. At one point she looked out over the water and said, "Your father would have enjoyed the timing of it." I smiled. He always did appreciate systems. She clinked her glass lightly against mine. And daughters who know when to stop underwriting nonsense. That, I think, is the final truth of the story. My husband thought I'd beg him to stay. He thought leaving would make him larger and me smaller. He thought the life around him existed because he occupied it. He was wrong. The life existed because I kept it running. And when I finally shut off everything he lived on, I didn't ruin him. I simply removed myself from the list of women willing to carry a man who called that love. Now the house is quiet. The accounts are clean. The locks answer correctly. The rooms belong to themselves again. And so do I.